The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as Sarah Collins turned her silver Subaru onto Maple Drive for the first time in nearly 8 months. Her knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as the two-story Colonial with navy blue shutters came into view at the end of the cul-de-sac. Their dream home, hers and Mike's, the one they'd spent 3 years saving for, purchased just 2 weeks before his final deployment. Sarah pulled into the driveway and sat motionless, the engine idling. Through the windshield, she could see the polished wooden memorial case with its glass cover protecting the precisely folded American flag, the same flag that had draped Lieutenant Commander Michael Collins' casket before being presented to her with solemn words she barely remembered hearing. Mike's SEAL teammates had installed it 4 months ago, a tasteful monument surrounded by river stones and small planted shrubs. They'd wanted her to have something tangible to come home to. "We're home, Mike," she whispered, touching the platinum band she still wore. The moving truck wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. Tonight, she had only essential luggage and the memories that seemed to press against the windows of the home they'd never shared. As Sarah stepped from the car, she noticed curtains shifting in windows across the street, neighbors curious about the young widow finally moving in. An older couple from next door, the Hendersons, approached with a home-baked lasagna and awkward but genuine condolences. Others kept their distance, some offering sympathetic waves from their driveways. Sarah appreciated both responses equally. Acknowledgement without intrusion was all she could handle. She was unlocking her front door when the sharp tap of heels on concrete announced another visitor. Deborah Winters, HOA president, approached with determined strides, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor, blonde highlights catching the setting sun. "Sarah, dear, welcome to the neighborhood. We're all just heartbroken about your situation," Deborah said, her voice carrying a practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes, which were already assessing the property. "I wanted to personally deliver your welcome packet and review a few items." Sarah accepted the thick folder mechanically, noticing how Deborah's gaze kept drifting to the memorial in the front yard. "I also needed to bring something to your attention," Deborah continued, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "The structure in your front yard wasn't approved by the Architectural Review Committee. I understand the sentimental value, but we have strict guidelines about lawn ornaments and permanent structures. You'll need to remove it within 14 days or submit a formal variance request, which, I should warn you, is unlikely to be approved in its current form." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She looked from Deborah to the memorial, the only physical representation of Mike's sacrifice that she could visit whenever grief overwhelmed her at 3 a.m., and felt something crystallize inside her chest. "That's not happening," Sarah said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "Ever." Deborah's professional smile tightened. "I understand this is an emotional time, but rules are rules. We maintain property values through consistency." "Thank you for the welcome packet," Sarah interrupted, stepping inside her empty house. "I've had a long drive." The door closed on Deborah's startled expression, and Sarah leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the hardwood floor of her empty foyer. Through the side window, she watched Deborah linger uncertainly before marching back down the walkway, phone already pressed to her ear. Sarah unpacked a folding chair and placed it by the front window. That night, she slept fitfully in the empty house, waking frequently to check that the memorial was still intact, illuminated by security lights she'd installed that very evening. 3 days after Sarah moved in, between unpacking kitchen boxes and arranging furniture, she found the first violation notice tucked neatly into her mailbox. The official letterhead of Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association flared up at her, the words, "Unauthorized structure," printed in bold beneath her address. The next day, while planting flowers around Mike's memorial, Sarah spotted Deborah Winters standing on the sidewalk, photographing the display with her smartphone, lips pressed into a thin line. When their eyes met, Deborah didn't look away, instead lifting her chin defiantly before marching off. By Friday, a certified letter arrived, requiring Sarah's signature. Inside, legal language threatened daily fines of $100 until the non-conforming yard structure was removed. Sarah added it to a growing folder on her kitchen counter, too focused on creating a livable home to respond yet. Each night she called one of Mike's teammates, the men who had become her surrogate family during deployments and now in widowhood, venting her frustrations in hushed tones. "They can't do that, Sarah," insisted Ryan Delaney, Mike's best friend since BV/S training. "That flag was presented to you by the United States government. It represents Mike's service. This is just some power-tripping Karen with a clipboard." It wasn't only Deborah, however. The following Tuesday, while Sarah was at her new teaching job at the local elementary school, two members of the HOA board conducted a property inspection from the sidewalk, taking photos of not only the memorial but also of Sarah's mailbox, which needed repainting, a small patch of dandelions near her driveway, and the moving boxes still visible through her garage windows. That night, as she sorted through Mike's belongings in the garage, a task she could only handle in small doses, Sarah came across a weathered fruit locker she hadn't opened since his death. Inside lay his personal items from deployment, dog-eared paperbacks, a journal she couldn't yet bring herself to read, and a waterproof case of photographs. Sarah spread them across the concrete floor, tears flowing freely as she traced Mike's face with her fingertips. Photos of him with his platoon in various locations, some she recognized, others classified, showed the brotherhood that had sustained him. Men with arms slung over shoulders, covered in dust and sweat, but grinning beneath assault gear. Men who had been to her home for barbecues before deployments. Men who had stood stone-faced at Mike's funeral, who had helped install the memorial. She recognized Commander Wilson, the unit's leader, who had spoken at the memorial service. She saw Ryan and Chief Petty Officer Malik Johnson, and the baby-faced Lieutenant Baker who'd sobbed openly at the graveside. They had all offered their support, told her to call if she ever needed anything. With sudden resolve, Sarah took a photo of the HOA letters with her phone and composed a group text. "Remember when you said to call if I needed anything?" Well, Deborah Winters hummed to herself as she drafted the agenda for the upcoming HOA meeting. With 15 years as a realtor and 3 consecutive terms as HOA president, she had developed an immaculate sense for threats to property values. The Collins situation needed to be nipped in the bud before others got ideas about installing whatever they wanted in their front yards. Yes, the military widow story was unfortunate, but rules were rules. Consistency was key. If they allowed one exception, soon the whole neighborhood would descend into chaos. Garden gnomes, string lights, lawn flamingos. Her own perfectly manicured yard was a testament to what could be achieved within the guidelines. The monthly HOA meeting, held in the community center adjacent to the neighborhood pool, proceeded as Deborah had orchestrated. Sarah Collins was notably absent. Not that Deborah had expected her to attend, given the circumstances. Moving to new business, Deborah announced, shuffling papers importantly. The Architectural Committee has drafted an amendment to Section 7.3 of our bylaws, addressing military memorabilia and memorial displays. While we respect our servicemen and women, such displays should be limited to designated holiday periods such as Memorial Day and Veterans Day. At all other times, they should be maintained inside the home. The proposed amendment passed with minimal discussion, though 2 board members abstained, uncomfortable with the thinly veiled targeting of the new widow's memorial. The meeting minutes, delivered to all homeowners the following day, made it clear that enforcement would begin immediately. Deborah was pleased with herself when the second violation cycle began the following Monday. Precedent in Willowbrook Estates was clear. No one defied the HOA for long. As she walked Mitzi, her purebred Pomeranian, past Sarah's house that evening, she noticed with satisfaction that while the memorial remained, the grass needed cutting and a section of gutter had come loose in the recent thunderstorm. More violations to document. What Deborah didn't expect was her own mailbox the next morning. It started with 3 letters, thick cream envelopes with handwritten addresses from different states. By week's end, there were 27, each postmarked from military bases across the country and overseas. Some bore the Navy's insignia, others Army, Marines, Air Force, a united front. Each letter politely but firmly explained the significance of the memorial flag display, the sacrifice it represented, and requested the HOA reconsider its position. Similar letters, Deborah soon discovered with mounting horror, had been sent to every FOA board member and committee chair. This is coordinated harassment, she insisted at the emergency board meeting hastily called in her living room that evening. We cannot allow residents to outsource intimidation tactics when they don't like our rules. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bernard Higgins, the treasurer, cleared his throat. Deborah, I'm not sure this is a battle worth fighting. My son-in-law served in Iraq, and these military folks take their traditions seriously. That's precisely the problem, Deborah interrupted. Everyone has a cause they believe supersedes the rules. If we cave on this, next month someone will want a 6-foot religious statue or a political billboard. The bylaws exist for a reason. Despite the discomfort of 3 board members, her determination prevailed. The fines would begin on Monday, $100 per date until compliance was achieved or the maximum penalty of $2,500 was reached, at which point legal action would commence. She'll fold, Deborah assured them. They always do. Saturday dawned clear and hot, the kind of early summer day that normally found Willowbrook Estates alive with the sounds of lawn mowers and children playing. Sarah had been awake since dawn, sitting on her front porch with coffee, staring at the certified letter that had arrived yesterday outlining the fines that would begin Monday. At precisely 800, military time still governed her days. 2 men in crisp civilian clothes pulled up in a black pickup truck. From her surveillance position behind her front curtains, Deborah Winters immediately recognized them from the funeral, both Navy SEALs who had served with Mike. The taller one was Ryan Delaney, Mike's best friend. The other, a compact man with shoulders like a bull, she didn't know by name. They greeted Sarah with warm hugs. Over the next 4 hours, they methodically transformed her yard, mowing, edging, trimming bushes, weeding flower beds. They worked with military precision, carefully maintaining the areas around the memorial without disturbing it. When they finished, Ryan attached a small solar light that would illuminate the flag case at night. They ate lunch on Sarah's porch, their laughter occasionally carrying across the quiet street. Deborah documented everything with her smartphone camera. By Sunday morning, 4 more visitors had arrived, 2 men and 2 women, all with the unmistakable bearing of military personnel. They brought building materials and began constructing a tasteful stone border around the memorial, adding small military service emblems at each corner. As they worked, curious neighbors began to stop by. "What's this symbol mean?" asked 10-year-old Tyler from across the street, pointing at the seal trident embedded in the stonework. Chief Petty Officer Malik Johnson crouched to the boy's level. "It means her husband was one of the toughest, bravest men I ever knew. He saved my life twice." "Was he like a superhero?" Tyler asked, eyes wide. "Better," Johnson replied. "He was real." By afternoon, a steady stream of neighbors brought cold drinks and snacks to the working group. Conversations formed on the lawn, with Sarah occasionally joining, sharing stories about Mike for the first time without breaking down. Even Bernard Higgins, the HOA treasurer, stopped by briefly, awkwardly offering condolences before hurrying away when he spotted Deborah watching from down the street. Deborah called an emergency Sunday night board meeting, which only 2 other members attended. "They're making it worse," she fumed, slapping photos down on her dining room table. "Now it's an entire garden feature with lighting and stonework. This is deliberate defiance." "It looks nice, actually," ventured Linda Roberts, the secretary. "Very tasteful." "That's not the point," Deborah snapped. "Next week we'll have more military people showing up. Where does it end? Are we running a neighborhood or Arlington National Cemetery?" The comment hung awkwardly in the air, neither board member willing to meet her eyes. "The fines begin tomorrow," Deborah finally said. "No exceptions." Wednesday morning found Sarah preparing for work, arranging her lesson plans for her 3rd grade class, when the doorbell rang. A young man in khakis and a button-down stood on her porch, press credentials hanging around his neck. "Ms. Collins, I'm Jason Rodriguez from the Westfield Chronicle. I was hoping to talk to you about your dispute with the Willowbrook Estates of OA. Sarah hadn't sought publicity. That wasn't her style. But someone had tipped off the local newspaper. After a moment's hesitation, she invited Jason in, telling him the whole story over coffee at her kitchen table, showing him the growing file of HOA notices and the letters of support from military families. By Friday, the story had gone viral. 808 targets fallen Navy SEAL memorial. Widow stands ground. The online version included photos of the memorial, Sarah holding Mike's dress uniform photo, and quotes from neighbors both supporting and opposing the HOA position. The comments section overflowed with outrage. The OA's phone line was jammed with calls from across the country. News vans parked at the neighborhood entrance, reporters attempting to interview residents as they came and went. The Willowbrook Estates Facebook group, normally dedicated to lost pets and contractor recommendations, erupted into heated debates. Deborah Winters stopped taking Mitzi for walks after being approached by a reporter asking for her side of the story. She sent a terse email to board members, instructing them not to speak to the media and insisting they were on solid legal ground. That weekend, the true response began. Shortly after dawn on Saturday, a convoy of vehicles with military license plates from 6 different states began arriving at Sarah's house. Men and women in various stages of military service, some active duty, some retired, many from Mike's former unit, gathered quietly on her lawn. They brought flowers to place around the memorial. They shared stories about Mike with neighbors who came by. They helped an elderly couple across the street with their own yard work. Not one of them mentioned the HOA dispute directly. They didn't have to. Their presence spoke volumes. By Sunday afternoon, there were 27 service members in the neighborhood. They slept in Sarah's guest rooms, on her couches, in tents in her backyard. They cooked massive meals that Sarah shared with any neighbors who stopped by. They fixed her loose gutter, repainted her mailbox, and pressure washed her driveway, addressing every violation the HOA had documented. During a cookout that evening, Commander Wilson, Mike's former commanding officer, took Sarah aside. "The rest of the platoon will be here by Friday," he said quietly. Every single one requested leave, even Jenkins, who's stationed in Japan. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They don't have to do this." "Yes," Wilson said simply, "they do. We leave no one behind, not even after death." The emergency HOA meeting on Monday evening was moved from Deborah's living room to the community center to accommodate the unprecedented turnout. The room, normally hosting a dozen regulars at most, was standing room only. Homeowners who had never attended before packed the space, many sporting American flag pins hastily purchased over the weekend. Deborah, flustered by the turnout but determined to maintain control, called the meeting to order 10 minutes late. "We have a standard agenda to follow." "Point of order," interrupted Mr. Abernathy, an older man who had recently moved in down the street. In his crisp button-down and with his ramrod-straight posture, he had the unmistakable bearing of career military. "I'd like to discuss the Collins property specifically. I motion to grant a permanent variance for the memorial display." "That's not how this works," Deborah replied, her knuckles whitening around her gavel. "The architectural guidelines are clear, and we can't make exceptions based on emotional appeals." "I second the motion," called another resident, a young mother whose husband was currently deployed with the Army. "And I'd like to propose an amendment to our bylaws to create exceptions for military memorials." Deborah's face flushed. "The board will take your suggestions under advisement, but we have procedures." From the back of the room came a new voice. "As the HOA's legal counsel, I should point out that several states have passed laws protecting military memorials and displays of the American flag from HOA restrictions." All heads turned to see a distinguished gray-haired man in an expensive suit. Deborah blinked in confusion. "I didn't call our attorney for this meeting." "You didn't," the man confirmed. "The Collins family did. I'm Richard Hargrove, and while I typically represent corporations, my son is a Marine Corps captain, and I've offered my services pro bono in this matter." He held up a thick folder. "While our state hasn't yet passed specific protections, there's pending legislation, and fighting this could expose the association to significant legal costs and potentially damages, particularly given the public relations aspect. A murmur ran through the crowd. Bernard Higgins cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table the fines until we've reviewed the legal implications. Deborah's mouth opened and closed soundlessly for a moment before she regained her composure. Fine. We'll suspend enforcement temporarily and schedule a vote on the variance for next week. Meeting adjourned. She gathered her papers and fled the room, ignoring questions shouted from the crowd. Outside in the parking lot, Sarah stood surrounded by Mike's teammates and neighbors she was just beginning to know. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something like hope rising in her chest. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Despite the temporary suspension of fines, Deborah wasn't done fighting. Her reputation was at stake now, her authority publicly challenged. The next morning, she began going door to door with a petition, clipboard in hand, Mitzi tucked under her arm. I'm sure you understand the precedent this would set, she told each neighbor who answered. Today it's a military memorial. Tomorrow it's lawn flamingos and political signs. Property values will plummet if we start allowing exceptions. What she didn't expect was the quiet resistance from her neighbors. Many politely declined to sign. Others asked pointed questions about why this was such a priority. My daughter serves in the Navy, said Mrs. Petrovich, who had always been a reliable ally in HOA matters. I can't imagine telling her family they couldn't honor her if, God forbid. A few simply closed their doors in Deborah's face. By evening, she had only 8 signatures, mostly from residents who lived furthest from Sarah's home and hadn't witnessed the weekend's events. That night, as Sarah graded papers at her kitchen table surrounded by 5 of Mike's teammates who were planning a surprise landscaping project, her phone rang. It was Richard Hargrove, the attorney. They're still planning to hold the vote, he informed her. Winters is lobbying hard for a compromise that would allow a smaller memorial in your backyard, out of public view. Sarah's hand tightened around her pen. Not happening. I agree, Hargrove said, which is why I've filed preliminary paperwork for an injunction if they attempt to enforce any fines or removal. But there's something else, something I think may resolve this more definitively. The next morning, Sarah left for work as usual, her house guests still asleep after staying up late swapping stories about Mike. By noon, the text messages started. Are you watching the street cameras? You need to see this. On her lunch break, Sarah pulled up the neighborhood security app on her phone and gasped. In a scene that neighbors would describe for years afterward, 4 black SUVs had pulled up to her house. From them emerged 16 men, Mike's entire former platoon, including Commander Wilson. All had taken leave to be there, including Jenkins, flown in from Japan as promised. They formed a single line on the sidewalk in front of Sarah's home, standing at parade rest in civilian clothes. They didn't speak, didn't approach anyone. They simply stood, a living wall between the memorial and any who might threaten it. Throughout the day, neighbors drove slowly past, many stopping to bring water or food to the silent guardians. Children were picked up early from school to witness the display. Patriotic neighbors brought out their own flags in solidarity. By evening, as Sarah drove home with tears blurring her vision, news helicopters circled overhead, and the story had reached national broadcasts. We'll stand watch in shifts, Commander Wilson told her quietly as she walked, shell-shocked, past the line of men who had served with her husband. Around the clock until the vote. That night, Richard Hargrove called Deborah Winters with a stark message. End this now, or the board will be facing personal liability. This isn't just bad press anymore. It's becoming a national referendum on how we treat Gold Star families. The morning of the vote dawned clear and cool, a brief respite from the summer heat. Sarah had barely slept, the house full of Mike's teammates talking in low voices through the night, planning strategies like the high-stakes operation this had become. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, wondering how her quiet grief had escalated into this public standoff. When the doorbell rang, Sarah expected another reporter or supporter. Instead, she opened the door to find Deborah Winters standing alone on her porch, without her clipboard or her dog. Gone was the perfect hair and confident posture. Instead, She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed as though she hadn't slept either. Behind her, at a respectful distance, two of Mike's teammates stood watch, their expressions neutral but vigilant. "I'd like to withdraw the violation notices," Deborah said stiffly. "The board has voted via emergency email session to grant a permanent variance for your memorial." Sarah nodded but said nothing, not trusting her voice. "I didn't know," Deborah continued after an uncomfortable silence, looking past Sarah to a photo of Mike visible in the hallway. "I didn't understand what it meant to you, to all of them." She gestured vaguely toward the street where several of Mike's platoon members were gathered, helping another neighbor repair a fence. "He would have done the same for any of them," Sarah said simply. Deborah nodded, swallowing hard. "My father was in Vietnam," she said suddenly. "He never talked about it, never wanted any recognition. I think I always thought that was how military families preferred it. Private." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Some do, but Mike was proud of his service, and his team was his second family." Deborah nodded again, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded check. "This is from the HOA General Fund. We'd like to contribute to the upkeep of the memorial. The board approved it unanimously this morning." Sarah accepted the check silently, noting the tears that Deborah was fighting to hold back. "The meeting tonight is still on," Deborah added, regaining some of her composure. "We'll be formalizing the variance and discussing a broader amendment to our bylaws. I hope you'll attend." That afternoon, the subdued HOA meeting saw record attendance. The board unanimously approved a new bylaw amendment. Displays honoring fallen military service members shall be permitted, provided they are maintained in good condition and constructed with appropriate materials. Commander Wilson, invited to speak, stood with military precision at the front of the room. Lieutenant Commander Collins lived by a code that extended beyond battlefield tactics. He believed in service to his country, to his teammates, and to his community. This memorial honors not just his sacrifice, but the values he stood for. On behalf of his platoon and the entire special warfare community, we thank you for recognizing that some things transcend rules and regulations. As summer progressed into fall, the memorial became a quiet gathering place. Veterans in the community would stop by to pay respects. Children asked their parents questions about sacrifice and service. The solar light kept the flag illuminated through the night, a beacon of remembrance. Sarah began hosting monthly cookouts, inviting neighbors and any of Mike's teammates who could attend. She established a scholarship in Mike's name at the local high school for students pursuing military service or first responder careers. And on patriotic holidays, no one in Willowbrook Estates flew their flags higher or more proudly than Deborah Winters, who had learned, like everyone else in the community, that true legacy lives not in bylaws, but in hearts and memories. The following year, she stepped down as LWA president and joined the newly formed Community Relations Committee, which focused on bringing neighbors together rather than keeping them in line. On the anniversary of Mike's death, Sarah woke to find the memorial surrounded by flowers and notes, not just from Mike's teammates, but from neighbors throughout Willowbrook Estates. Among them was a single white rose with a card that read simply, "You would be proud of how you stood your ground. Deborah."